Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about lie detection, and not just lie detection in terms of the uh, polygraph test, but also lie detection in terms of investigative interviewing, interrogations, and other aspects of lie detection. So, if y'all want, there was a show back a couple of years ago called "Lie to Me" about a research scientist who was able to detect deception, very, very well. And you can click on this YouTube link here and watch kind of a preview for the show about all the different micro expressions that may be present in lie detection and how there are these quote unquote lie detection wizards out there that are able to determine if people are lying or not. So, how often do people lie? Is lying really an issue? Well, the average person reported lied about 34% of the people who he or she interacted with on a typical week. All right, so that's about a third of the people they interacted with. College students, so you guys, actually lie to your moms in about half of your conversations with her. No, mom, I'm studying a lot. No, I'm not going out to the bar. No, I never do anything bad, right? Respondents in one survey reported lying an average of 13 times per week, which is probably pretty low. Married couples lied in 1 out of 10 interactions with their partners. No, of course you don't look fat in that dress. No, of course you're the best looking guy I've ever seen. And 83% of respondents said they would lie in order to get a job. I think that the biggest problem with me is that I'm a perfectionist and I work too hard. That's probably not true, right? So, what types of things do people lie about? Often they lie about their feelings or their opinions, right? Right now, if you voted for Donald Trump, it's not a super popular thing to be associated with, and so a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump probably lie about it. They lie about their actions, their plans, or their whereabouts. No, mom, I'm driving to church, not to the bar. Their knowledge, achievements, and their failures, right? Oh, I am very, very bright, or no, I've never gotten a B on any exam ever. Explanations for their behavior. Oh, I didn't mean what I said. I wasn't thinking when I said that. Or facts and personal possessions. I only own Rolexes, right? Well, that's probably not true, right? How good are people at actually detecting these lies? Well, if you click on this link at the top there, you can actually do a study of whether or not you can spot a liar. But we found in a meta-analysis of 25,000 people across 253 studies that people are actually pretty bad at it. People are only correct about 54% of the time, and they're only better, or they're better if you hear it, but you don't actually see the lie. Seeing the lie actually makes people worse. Even still, though, 54% of the time is really not different from flipping a coin, right? People also tend to have a kind of truth bias. People are biased toward judging statements as truthful. 61% of truthful statements were correctly classified as truthful, whereas only 47% of lies were correctly classified as lies. So there's this basic idea and what prompted quite a bit of lie detection research is that police officers and other law enforcement personnel believe that they are pretty adept or good at deception detection. In fact, they even get trained on how to detect deception better. However, these experts like police, trial judges, psychologists, and people who carry out lie detector tests had similar accuracy rates to lay people in lab studies, which meant that all of these alleged experts were actually no different than random people on the streets. The only main difference between the two groups was that experts in the criminal justice system tend to have this kind of lie bias as opposed to a truth bias. They tend to believe that people lie more often than they tell the truth. Now, one of the big problems, and why this is even really a topic of study in psychology and law, is because Ekman, in 1991, with some co-authors, in this case O'Sullivan, did a lot of research where they identified lie detection wizards and said, look, we've cracked the code of lying, and there are these things called micro expressions that show that people know how to lie, or that give off these ideas about lying, right? And found that Secret Service agents in particular were really good at achieving these lie detection wizard status. There's something about the way Secret Service agents are trained that make them better, right? Bond, however, in 2008 responded to Ekman's articles and claimed that they were not actually all that accurate, right? the results suggest that there were only about 73% were accurate in detecting lies about opinions, whereas 63% were accurate in detecting lies about mock theft, and 48% about detecting accuracy in emotions, right? So these aren't necessarily bad percentages, but they don't necessarily show any sort of micro-expressions or any sort of wizardry that is present, right? Specifically, people started looking at, are there cues about lying, right? Are there systematic differences in external behavior between these liars and these truth tellers? And so some researchers examined videotaped suspect interviews for high-stakes crimes like rape, murder, and arson. And later, external evidence used to confirm or refute the suspect's account, right? So we looked at what these suspects did, their behaviors, as well as their statements, and then looked at evidence to say which of these are lying statements and which of these are truth-telling statements, and are there things that are related? And so what are some of these things that people think are commonly associated with lying, right? A lot of people have a lot of conceptions, which are misconceptions, about these nonverbal cues. For example, gaze behavior, right? If you make eye contact or don't make eye contact, if you look up and to the left, you're lying. If you smile too much, if you move your head too much, your gestures, your postural shifting, your self-touching or self-grooming behaviors, shoulder shrugs, all of these things might mean you're actually a big fat liar, right? But none of these are actually related to deception. What are things that are related to deception? Higher pitched voices, including few details, fewer hand movements, fewer foot movements, increased eye blinks, right? Dilated pupils, decreased speech, decreased admitted lack of memory, right? And so all these things that we thought were associated with lying, actually the opposites are typically true, right? And that is already a problem for research. But in order for us to even measure all of these things, we have to know what the baseline is, right? So it's hard to just look at someone and say, you are moving your arms less than a normal person, because that person might just not be someone who moves their arms a lot, right? But it's less for them. Higher pitched voice for them. I've never been accused of having a deep, burly voice, as I'm sure you guys have gotten used to from watching all these lectures, right? People might hear me talking right now and say, oh my God, he's lying to us, right? Well, that's actually not the case. I just naturally have this voice, right? If I was lying, I'd be up an octave or something, right? And so some generalizations about human detectors are really that people are generally unable to detect deception. Veracity judgments also tend to be based on the wrong criteria. So how much someone's lying or anything else are actually based on the wrong criteria. And there's really no single indicator that proves truth or guilt. We can use clusters of indicators that are both verbal and nonverbal to try and suggest guilt, but there's no single indicator. And these are often dependent on the liar, not the lie detector. Some people are better at lying than others. My wife actually tells me that she can see times where I'm lying to my mom or my dad, and it concerns her because of how easily I do it and how good I am at doing it. Of course, after having enough experiences of watching me lie, she can now pretty well detect when I'm not being 100% honest with her. And that leads us to the next point. Familiar individuals are much better at spotting if you're lying versus unfamiliar individuals. And that makes sense, right? My wife knows me better than any other person on this planet knows me, and so she knows if I'm full of it or not. If some of you who've never had me before in person, I can walk right up to you and tell you a bold-faced lie, and it could be super obvious to my wife, but you're not going to know because you've never actually interacted with me before. So how can we improve these lie detection skills? Well, we have to unravel the strategy of good lie detectors, right? And encourage lie detectors to avoid paying attention to non-diagnostic cues. Ignore a lot of this stuff, right? Ignore the non-diagnostic stuff. There's also this kind of implicit lie detection that takes place, where we look at a combination of verbal and nonverbal cues and comparable truths, right? And we should also interview for deception detection. That last one is the most important, especially for novel people with each other. An investigator in an interrogation room, for example. We've already talked about some issues in false confession, and in fact, a lot of that lie detection stuff that we talked about several slides ago is what the Reed technique says you should look for to know if someone's lying. Also, if you notice, a lot of those nonverbal cues to detect deception are also pretty highly correlated with nervousness. But we'll get to that later, right? So one way to interview to detect deception is imposing cognitive load, right? Lying is significantly more cognitively demanding than truth-telling. And in fact, the old adage goes, you should always tell the truth because then you won't have to remember what you lied about, right? And so if you make liars cognitively busy, they will have more difficulty telling their lie. Some examples of making them cognitively busy are recall the event backwards. Or say, you have to maintain eye contact with me while you tell me this story. Or throw a ball with them back and forth and have them tell the truth. They're going to be so busy trying to catch the ball, especially if you throw it not quite to them and make them have to reach for it and stuff, they're going to have a much harder time keeping their lie up. There's also a strategic question approach. Use unanticipated questions, like, for example, repeating questions. Have the suspects draw a sketch of what they used, or use strategic use of evidence, withhold certain evidence and ask specific questions about it, and then present the evidence. That way, the person trying to catch the lie can focus on the inconsistencies and say, why are there all of these inconsistencies? There's also lies, emotions, and sympathetic nervous system activity, right? Devices exist that can measure heart rate, brain activity, changes in blood pressure, increases in skin conductance due to sweat and body temperature, right? And these are basically what the polygraph does, right? The assumption underlying the polygraph is that for most of us, when we lie, we feel very guilty about it, and that is we have an emotional response of shame. Thus, to the extent that one feels guilty when they lie, lies can be picked up as changes in one or more of these indices described above, right? And so if you feel really guilty about your lies, your heart rate's going to go up, your brain activity is going to change, there's going to be changes in your blood pressure, and we can detect that in the polygraph. Originally, lies were detected using such machines with a procedure termed the RI, or relevant irrelevant procedure, right? So when we used the polygraph, we looked for guilty or lying suspects that would show much stronger emotional reactions to relevant rather than irrelevant questions. The problem, of course, is there's a high false positive rate due to the fact that the machine can't discriminate one negative emotion from another, right? So let's say you had a really negative emotion about kitchens. All right, let's say whenever I got spanked, my mother used a wooden spoon. The wooden spoon is located in the kitchen, so it would routinely happen in the kitchen, or maybe my bedroom, right? She might say, go to your room and then show up from the kitchen with the wooden spoon. If they were to say to you, how do you feel about kitchens? I might have a strong negative reaction to kitchens, right? Because that's why I used to get spanked. I don't anymore, right? Because I've got a very strong positive reaction to kitchens, because that's what feeds me. But let's just say, for sake of argument, I had a strong negative reaction to it. If they said, so, were you in the dead person's kitchen? I might have a reaction to it, because it's like, oh my god, I hate kitchens. Well, but that's because I actually have this other issue, right? And so people will say, oh, he must be guilty. He had this reaction to the kitchen, when really it was a different emotional response. There's also control questions, right? Suspects are asked control questions relevant to the crime and questions irrelevant to the crime that were designed to produce kind of a controlled lie. Like, for example, have you ever stolen anything, but this was a murder, right? Guilty suspects should show a stronger response to a relevant question, and innocent suspects should show a stronger response to the irrelevant questions. Again, these are kind of assumptions, right? There's also the guilty knowledge test, and this procedure is aimed at testing to see if the suspect has knowledge that should only be available to the police, surviving victims, and the perpetrator. For example, where was the victim stabbed? The kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom. Of the alternatives, only one could possibly be correct, right? A guilty person should show a strong response when the correct option is presented. And so as you're going through it, right? Where was the person stabbed? The kitchen? No response. The bedroom? No response. The bathroom? Super high response. Aha! It must have been that you were in the bathroom and you knew that. If a number of such questions can be made and a suspect always shows the strongest emotional response to the quote-unquote correct alternative, this proves strong evidence that he possesses guilty knowledge. Again, of course, the police, as we learned from false confessions, might present that guilty knowledge to you ahead of time on accident, but that's the basic idea here, right? Again, part of the problem, though, with lie detectors is that it's very easy to beat the system, right? You could develop a breathing strategy by alternating the rate of breathing during relevant questions and comparison questions. You could try and do complex calculations in your head for every single question. What day were you born? And then you think to yourself, 13 divided by 572. And then you answer, October 14th, 1988. Give me gifts. All right, you could think about something very exciting or very frightening, right? I hate snakes. I'm terrified of snakes. In fact, not too long ago, my wife and I were walking up to our front door and a snake slithered across the sidewalk, and I shoved her toward the snake and said, "Get it away from me." She didn't find that funny. But if I think of something frightening, that could increase my emotional response. I could bite the side of my tongue hard enough to cause pain, but not so hard to draw blood. In Ocean's 12 or 13 or 11 or one of those Ocean's movies, one of the guys beat the lie detector test by stepping on a pin in his shoe. Oh, and in fact, there's the next thing. Insert a small tack in your shoe and press down on it during the comparison questions. Of course, if they find the tack in your shoe, that's a problem. Other remaining problems with polygraphs, though. There's validity issues. In all cases, the reading of the polygraph results is still more of an art than a science, and different experts may differ in their analyses. You get 3 lie detectors, administrators in a room reading the same polygraph, they're going to pick up on different things as lies than each other, even. So the inter-rater reliability is actually pretty low. Finally, this all rests on the notion that a guilty person will actually show some sort of emotional response. What if I walked into my house and saw someone trying to murder my wife, and I killed them and buried them out in the swamp? I'm not going to feel bad about that because they were trying to kill my wife, right? So I might not feel bad about my crime, or I might just learn not to respond to it. If I'm some sort of sociopath or psychopath, I might not have a strong emotional response to that crime that happened, right? As far as admissibility, given the controversy over accuracy and assumptions of polygraph tests, the results are typically deemed as inadmissible in most courts. Sometimes, if the defense attorney and the state attorney agree, the polygraph evidence can be admitted if it's deemed to clarify the case. But even when it is, it's almost always accompanied by a warning from the judge. By the way, this is an exam question. It's almost always accompanied by a warning from the judge emphasizing the potential inaccuracies of the test. So the only way polygraphs are admitted in court is if both sides agree to it and the judge warned you about it. All right, and that's important, and you'll know that for the exam. So what's the take home here? Lie detection is actually pretty difficult, right? It's something that needs to be done in our legal system, and our legal system usually does a pretty okay job of it, right? But lie detector tests, unfortunately, are not the way to go, and these ideas of human lie detection or human lie detectors also aren't really the best way to go. So that's all I've got for you today, and I will see you guys next time.